be very general because people are in three categories. They don't want to know anything about genealogy, and they're interested in everything you find. They're actively involved. I'm not going to ask them. I really don't want to know how we're split here. But I'm going to try to say a little bit about how I learned things, generally how anybody can proceed. What do you look for? Where do you look? Who do you talk to? I started about 2.5 years ago, and I had a small pool of information when I started. And usually people are interested in how you started. My wife wanted to go to Cape Cod. I didn't want to go, so we went to Cape Cod. So I was tired. I stayed in a motel. She went into Sandwich, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod to see the glass flares. So I went in and started talking to the woman running the motel because she had a name that was familiar. I wanted to know if she'd come from Vermont. I'm a Vermonter. She said no. I explained, my family comes from Cape Cod. She said, well, why don't you walk down the road about a mile, go to the right across the railroad track, back to the woods, there's a cemetery there. So I walked back, went down the road, across the track, back into the cemetery, walked in, and here's half the Hollway family. And the Stones ran from like 1776 up to 1941, so here's generation about 6 up to number 10, and I'm number 12 or 13. So we stayed another day, and went into the courthouse, and looked up the records, and put them back to about the 3rd generation. So about 24 hours, having gone from nothing, I got from generation 3 up to generation, I knew what mine was, so it took me all the way to 12. So that was my starting point. So from that small folder, I've got now about 6 feet of material, trace. I've got a surname index that I've developed, about 670 names. I've got correspondence in the United States abroad, about 300 letters, and I get about 90% return. In this country, about 70% in Europe and Ireland and England, which I consider pretty reasonable. And my work is all unconventional. I don't use normal charts. I just started out teaching myself as I went. I put 2 names at the bottom and I grow it up. And then I take 2 names at the top and move over another chart and grow it up. So I've grown 300 charts going up family trees. So my side, my mother's side, 2 sides of my wife's family. I trace back into Ireland, England, about these number of families. So you know the person came where they came from, and that's most of them. That's about as far as I've gone. Some there's a record, and I've got whatever record was there the rest of the way back. The thing to find out is not a lot of the material you learn is purely by accident. The fact that you've been gathering a lot of information, these accidental facts fit into a total picture. So you collect a lot of information starting from before you know, and eventually you bring it together and it fits. Making it fit ends up being a lot of accidents. One of the steps you go through, the first step you do is sit down and write down everything you know and pass it on to all your children. And the next thing you do is you start asking your relatives, your ancestors, anybody you can find that's not a senior citizen that fits into beyond the senior citizen. They're 80 or 90 years old and have a wealth of information. One of the things you need to do is start asking questions as early as you can. The key thing, I think, is write down everything you know, hand it on to your children. So if you don't go any further, they've got this information. In my wife's case, because of arthritis and heart problems, when we started, her mother had lost all her memory. She knew the whole family for generations. So we knew another person that knew part of the family before us. She had a heart attack the week before I visited her. That wiped out that memory. Fortunately, she sat down and wrote a note for her children about 20 years ago, provided most of what she could have told us. So it's kind of key to, if you're not interested, write it down to your children. It's narratives. kind of things you collect. You want to collect things like surname. You want to know the exact spelling of the name. You want to know the full name. If you're going into Smith, you're not going to get there unless you know the full name. You need to know date, birthplace. You need to know the date, place of marriage. You want to find out death, place of marriage or death. And with information of birth, marriage, and death, you can go to courthouse records to find information. Otherwise, it's a random look for 100 years, you're not going to spend the time to look. You've got a specific year, even a specific date, you can walk into the courthouse, smell it, see, or wherever it has to be, you know where you have to go. Readily find the information. You need to know religious faith. There's a lot of records kept in the church records. Typically, if you get back before 1800, you need to start knowing what religious faith is. If you go into Ireland, you need to know this. If you go to Germany, you need to know this. Many places in this country, you need to know what the religious faith is. You have to go from public records to church records to at least know what faith you're starting with. And it's good, don't follow the preacher. I didn't read a lot of books. I just taught myself for the first 2 years until I had to go to books to learn more. You're better off to get a good reference book in any library of genealogy. Just read up some information. And the first thing to do is to set up a filing system. You set up a surname index. Preferable way to start is you get a 3-ring notebook and divide it into a lot of categories. And then as it grows, you grow from book to book. At least you can categorize the information. I see a lot of people walking around with bound notebooks, writing down notes. They reach a point in time where you want to break it out into, I've got 6 feet. You can't break out a bound notebook. The notes are all, they're all gathered together, front page, back page. You go through years copying it all over again. You got information, put it in 3-ring binders. You go to 5 binders instead of 1. Just open it up, put it in another binder, and expand your library. It's a key way to do it, I think, rather than getting a bunch of card files and stacking one behind the other. You get tied down to 2 defined resources. Summarize the facts and always. Once you get going, you've got more information than you think you have, simply because you haven't got some key to put it together. As time goes on, you go back and look over other information you had and find out, lo and behold, some of the pieces you have all put together. One of the key things you need to know is, it always sounds rather facetious, you need to know what you're looking for. To give you an example, looking at the wife's family in Cumberland County. And you need to know that in 1750 it was Cumberland County. The property went to Bedford County in 1771. 1787 it became Huntington County. 1846 became Blair County. The same problem in Maryland. You're looking in western Maryland. You've got Baltimore County 1660. You've got Frederick 1748. You've got Washington 1776. You've got Allegheny 1789. You need to know what you're looking for, so you have to do a little bit of history. The area you're interested in, what year, where was the county seat and what year, or what you find the records. You get into Ireland, the records go down to the township. The township is about 320 acres. So you know how big Ireland is. You got to go from Ireland down to the county, you go down to the parish, and you go down, you finally down to the township where you'll eventually find the records. You can go to Dublin and Belfast where you collect the information. Eventually get back into with this country, the Elgin City, you're going right down to a township, but this is quite as big as Elgin City. In England, you need to get into baronies and parishes and counties. So you need to do some study of the history of the area, geography of the area, in order to be able to do any research. The charts I'm using, I've got copies of these, I'll give them to you after the meeting, so you can use that, go back and look at it again. There are sources for information on every time period. 1900 to 19 today, talk primarily to family, friends, and relatives. Local authorities look at public records, like the city, for example. Again, you need to know how the city, our kind of government didn't exist before 1850. That means you got to go to Annapolis. Again, you need to know what you're looking for. From 1850 to 1890, you've got census records, you've got public vital records, you've got local newspapers, you've got family genealogies. The census record is now up to 1910. And you find these in the archives in Maryland, you can find down in Annapolis, Howard County. A year from now, you'll be able to find here, be a file here in this office. At least the local newspapers. Many families don't have their own family genealogy, but you may get back, 3 generations to find a genealogy for one of those families. And you go back, multiplies 2 every generation to go back. So to find period 1880 to 1910, tremendous boom, people publishing their family genealogy. They either want to become a member of the DAR or some other driving force like today, people want to know the roots again following the Civil War. So you find an awful lot of genealogies in the Library of Congress. Get into the period 1790 to 1850, then you go to the local courthouses, get the family genealogies, and look at the Mormon microfilm records. Mormons have microfilm genealogy data and vital records in every town in the United States, Europe, South America. They're pretty well getting into the whole world. Put it on file, put the original from Salt Lake out in Salt Lake City, and then they put the rest on microfilm. You can't get to Salt Lake City, but the Mormon libraries, for example, there's one in Silver Springs on Randolph Road. You can go down and look at the index, look up your name, look up the town, look up what you're interested in, and you can order that film in Salt Lake City, and they'll bring it in at $2 a film, and it'll sit there for, you can keep it several weeks, look at it, and then it'll go back. There's a tremendous amount of information available on microfilm. And in New England, and New York, and Pennsylvania, a lot of that gazetteers were written to cover the time period about 1790 to 1880. It's a vast amount of information in these documents. In case of minor searching in Vermont, I got a lot of information out of these. When you move back to 1628, 1790, the family, once in this time period, you're almost sure you're in New England. There's a lot of information in families in New England. Noted on here a couple references. In most cases, I'll give you this as a handout and a list of where these documents are in this area. More information, this immediate area, 50 miles, is probably anywhere in the country except Salt Lake City. We're interested in looking into whether there's a record of how a family member came to this country. There's a reference document about 3 volumes written by a Philby who happens to live here in Howard County, Sac. He made a computerized summary of all the books that exist and all the references that exist and passed through this. So you go to this 3 volume and there's a record in public evidence somewhere. He's got a reference. So this is a good reference to start from. It'll take you back to the primary reference. In most cases, you find it in the Library of Congress. I've listed here some reference books you can use and where you can find them. Find a lot of information in the Library of Congress. Find a lot of information in Peabody if you're looking England, Ireland, and England. I also find that there are a couple of bookstores, one in Boston and one in Rutland, Vermont. You're right, you get these catalogs and find a lot of reference books. You have no way of getting into it. You got a name and you got a place. You go to the bookstore's book and you find a reference. You live here, you just got to buy for a Congress and get it out and look at it. So it's a valuable resource. The card files at Peabody and card files at Library of Congress. There's also a growing good reference library near Painesville and Baltimore Community College. University of Maryland Baltimore campus, which is a very good reference. We've got a couple new grants listing what the main references are in this area. The Library of Congress, we've got all the local histories and genealogies, probably one. Family genealogies and town and county histories. For example, the history of Howard County you find there, history of some town in Pennsylvania or Vermont you find there if it exists. Another part of the Library of Congress called the Adams Building, they've got newspaper references. Madison Building, Washington, they've got good map reference library, geography books. For example, we've got you can't read it from there, but I've got a map of all Western Germany. It's all broken down into sections. You can go in and find a section of Germany you want a map, order that map, and they'll make a copy for you. It'll be blown up about this size, so I've got, you can't see it, I got red marks on here, areas I want. I ordered all those maps from the Library of Congress map room. So I identified all the communities I'm looking for. In this case, I'm looking into my wife's family, for a large part of it comes from Germany, so I can get right down to the town, and then turn around and write. In case I know the religion, if it's Presbyterian or Catholic, and write the Presbytery there and ask them to help do search. And in some cases I have, and I've got responses back, and I get back, several more generations. The same thing is true. We've got maps, I believe, up here on Pennsylvania in the 1850 period. Again, looking into my wife's family, I can find the names of the family on the land. So I find part of the area I'm looking for. You can go to that area, go to those courthouses, go to those churches, go to the cemeteries. Go to the cemetery first and get the dates, and then you go to the courthouse. In cases of Vermont, where I'm looking primarily, I've got the maps of the various counties of Vermont, and I can find, back in 1850, I can find where the people in my family had land. In the case of the town I grew up in, we got a copy of the town map in the Library of Congress, and I go down the street in 1850 and find out where the members of my lineage were living. Then I come back and look up on what the land deeds, in case the house I grew up in, I went back and looked it up, and we went back to 1830, and somebody said, well, write to the captain, ask for more information, so I wrote. They sent me information on the National Historical Building, which turned out it wasn't, I didn't know, and they sent me a picture, so out of that I got their history of the properties where I grew up, plus the picture. You never know what you're going to find when you ask somebody, and most people are very helpful. The DAR is a library in Washington in 1776. They've got reference books, family genealogies. They've got census records. If you remember, you can go and look at the census records there. We've also got all the lineage of people who want to join the DAR, which provides a lot of valuable information. You can find a link to the DAR record, you can order a copy of that DAR record, and then get some more ties into doing your family genealogy. The white gets ties into Maryland. I don't get ties outside of the mud. Going through one DAR record, I found common name out of New Jersey and her family that came back to Joseph Burgess, Howard County, who happened to be captain of the militia in Elton. And then that goes up the line, and we'll eventually get into Dorset. So I think Caleb Dorset, who has a big mansion across the road from where we live. So then we get a linkage back to the next door neighbor, 300 years back. So like provides historical evidence. Doesn't provide any prestige. We get a lot of historical evidence that I'm digging over. The National Historical Society has a library in Washington. And the Archives building in Washington has census records, they have immigration records on microfilm, they have Revolutionary War records. Census records are indexed up to about 1860, and then on there are other kinds of systems used to find data. A lot of the immigration records are random. In other words, you can start with a file about so big a microfilm and do a random search. Unless you know the shift of the year, you may spend years in there trying to find immigration information because it's not indexed, but it's there. The Revolutionary War records, not too hard to find because they are indexed. In the case of Harriet's family, I went back and found the Samuel Dean and served the Revolutionary War, and I got a copy of it. And sit down in a couple hours, I can transcribe it. So I can get information out of these records about who's in the family, where they came from. Sometimes that may be your only clue to get back past the American Revolution. Peabody Library has a tremendous wealth of information. We've got local histories and a lot of information on Pennsylvania, Maryland. As I mentioned, we've got an awful lot of information on Ireland and England. Every time I go in there, I see this one woman looking through books, 1400s and 1300s, and I marvel how she got there. Depends on how much variety you have, how far you get us on these things. You can find a lot of interesting things. I got one book out on Scotland looking up. My wife's family goes into Macintosh, my family goes into a family named Huntley. So I started reading this one excerpt about the warring plans of the Huntley and the Macintosh. Turned out the head of the Macintosh clan came to the Huntley castle. The Huntley chief was away, but the wife was there. During the conversations, he just settled things. He put his head on the blocks. So he bends over, puts his head down. She motions to the cook. Pop comes ahead, and the war goes on again. And at that point, the wife said, "Stop reading his words." Maryland Historical Society downtown has a lot of information. Pennsylvania State Library in Harrisburg has a lot of information on Pennsylvania. Lancaster has a Mennonite Historical Society that has a lot of information. And one of the things you learn is everywhere you go, you see somebody working, you look over their shoulder and see what they're doing, because you learn a lot. What are you looking up? What are you looking for? What do you have? I asked somebody at Kingsville Library what she was doing one time. The conversation led to using the Mennonite Library in Lancaster. I didn't know who it was, but it turned out, a year later, the Doris Chicken. So I went to the Lancaster Library. We looked for information for a while. I was going out the door, and this book that marked K-R-E-A-D-Y, Creedy. The wife's family has a C-R-E-A-D-Y. So I wrote to this man asking him about it. Got a letter back from him and a letter from another woman that written at the same time I did, in Pittsburgh, who was looking up C-R-E-A-D-Y. So then the woman in Pittsburgh and I started a correspondence. We put together the Creedy family that we were looking for all the way back for 10 generations. Then, using another reference this woman had, is a library in St. Louis that has the Hessian soldiers on a computer index. So she wrote to them with the name, and they gave us a reply back. They gave us city in Germany where this family comes from. So I wrote in this case to the Lutheran Presbytery in this town, Germany, because in the maps I got the Library of Congress, got a reply back and took it back 7 more generations. You never know where you're going to learn something. So if you ask questions, you learn 50% of what you learn. Asking somebody you don't know. If you're looking into Pennsylvania, you may look at the Quaker records. Swarthmore College near Philadelphia has a lot on the Quaker records. I mentioned Silver Springs Mormon Library where you can go and get reference information. Maryland Hall of Records has an awful lot of information on Western Maryland and even the Baltimore area. I mentioned the University of Maryland Baltimore campus, which is building a genealogical library.